Good morning, class. Craig Greeley here again with another topic, this time on something that is very near and dear to my heart here in Canada. That is the importance of maintenance records and reporting. Within my role here as one of the lead auditors for evaluating each unit's adherence to maintenance policy and procedure, this is the topic that come every Friday of an audit. I'm having to debrief a commanding officer on his unit and the areas and the elevation of risk within his organization because of their failures in their ability to adhere to the maintenance program and recording of the maintenance that was carried out. Throughout this presentation, we'll cover three key areas. To start, I think we need to go back to basics and talk about the 4 A's of maintenance. This is a topic that I discussed during week 2 in the presentation I provided then. Then we'll touch on what actually are the recording requirements, if you will, for carrying out maintenance on an aircraft, as well as we'll dive right in then to the importance of recording before concluding the presentation. If you recall from week 2, I described at that point in time what are the 4 A's of aircraft maintenance. Between the FAA, I'll speak to our Canadian regulations as well. These 4 A's define how maintenance at the end of the day is being conducted on an aircraft. But from those 4, I want to highlight 2 in particular. First and foremost, all maintenance on an aircraft shall be performed to an accepted standard. What those standards are depend, I largely believe, on the organization in which the aircraft is being serviced. But ultimately, what we're describing here are the overarching policies and principles in how maintenance is being performed, which dive secondary into when maintenance is being carried out, that maintenance is being performed in accordance with approved procedures. For that, mostly think of the aircraft maintenance manual set and how they would describe the respective tasks like changing an engine. It's important to set these standards and these procedures as a foundation for our follow-on discussions because at the end of the day, how can we be sure that the maintenance that was performed on the aircraft was done so in accordance with those standards and those procedures? So how do we know becomes the big question. What evidence do you as a maintenance manager have, or a CEO of an organization, what evidence do you have that you're able to demonstrate that the maintenance on your aircraft was done so in accordance with those accepted standards, was done so in accordance with those approved procedures? How do you know at the end of the day that your aircraft is free from risks and it is still being maintained in accordance with its certificate of airworthiness? If a technician or one of your subordinates were to provide to you a basic checklist, if you will, and a sheet of paper that had respective tick boxes next to it as an example, to simply say that this task, think of a brake change, check mark, engine change, check mark, fueling, check mark, serviced oleos, check mark, topped up oils, check mark, and that piece of paper was what was stored as a record, and all it had on it was check marks. Is that sufficient at the end of the day? Does that give you the level of confidence that your aircraft was being maintained? Do you know how it was maintained? Do you know what fuel loads on that aircraft? Do you know how much oil was put into the system? To that, do you know how much oil was not in the system before it was topped up? You don't know the status of the system beforehand. You don't know generally what the status of the system is afterwards. So how can you confidently say that that aircraft is still being maintained within its original certificate of conformance? How do you know that there are no risks against that aircraft before its next flight? So as we think back to FAA requirements, as we take a look at ICAO regulations, and you try to piece together what is it that we shall be recording at the end of the day, first and foremost, we want to ensure that whatever record we're producing has a detailed description of the maintenance that was carried out. Beforehand, that system was unserviceable for a reason. A maintenance technician came along and they did something to it. And the more descriptive that we can be in describing what was done to that aircraft, the better our records will be. In addition to that, that technician that did the maintenance, the person that certified the maintenance, the releasing authority for that maintenance activity that was just been carried out, that's all valid information. You want to ensure at the end of the day that the personnel carrying out the respective tasks were trained, qualified, and authorized to do so, having their names, having their attestation that that maintenance was done so in accordance with that applicable maintenance standard, in accordance with those approved procedures, and ultimately ensuring that they're accountable, if you will, as well as they accept the responsibilities of the maintenance that was carried out. In addition to that, think of a period of time down the road if you had your own aircraft and you were getting ready to sell it. Over the period of time that you've owned that aircraft, you've done sort of modifications, alterations, you've carried out service bulletins potentially on that aircraft, carried out any number of airworthiness directives, you've updated the timings for flight hours as an example, you've updated your engine cycles, and that's all required information to ensure that that aircraft is being captured in its current state, as well as to ensure that the maintenance activities that were deemed required beforehand, when we think of the preventative maintenance requirements, were done so, that that aircraft hasn't surpassed any lives of any of its installed components. Lastly, parts and tools are critical in my own mind. Think of an item, an engine as an example. It's installed, it's got a certain life on it, if you will, and over a period of time of that engine or that aircraft being utilized, you've accumulated a number of hours on it. And you want to be able to capture, if you will, those parts that have been installed so you can update its lives accordingly. Serial numbers, as another prime example, if you were to ever be told by the original equipment manufacturer that there's a batch of items that were affected by an error on the production line, as an example, you would want to know what serial number you might have installed on your aircraft if that OEM were to come and tell you that that serial number was affected. You want to go out and pull that. How else would you know that that serial number was installed on your aircraft if you didn't capture it down? Would you ground your entire fleet, if you will, to go out and search for that particular component? That's where having accurate records comes into play. According to ICAO, there are numerous reasons why it's important to record maintenance accurately and descriptive against each individual aircraft. First and foremost, it gives a picture of the status of the aircraft. Simply put, what are we talking about? It's unserviceable, it's serviceable. You can tell the lives of the various components. You can tell the airframe hours on that particular aircraft. You're able to tell where that aircraft is in its overarching preventative maintenance program. Secondly, by maintaining accurate records of what maintenance was done on that aircraft, you have an auditable trail that demonstrates that the aircraft is being maintained properly in accordance with its approved maintenance program. You're able to demonstrate the status of the airworthiness requirements. Again, think of the scheduled maintenance activities that have been carried out on that aircraft. You're able to confidently say that life limits have been reached, not overflown, if you will, as a key example, and ultimately that the certificate of airworthiness against your aircraft is still valid. As you were to fly from region to region, from your local base, and you fly internationally, it's that certificate of airworthiness that demonstrates to those other regulators that your aircraft is being maintained in accordance with its approved maintenance program, and that it poses no risk, if you will, to civilians, personnel, and infrastructure in that particular region. For me, the need to maintain accurate records against an airframe cannot be overstressed. The need to maintain records provides that objective-based evidence linking back to those previous principles I've talked about, and as I've alluded to once already, to give you that auditable trail of the maintenance that's being performed. It ensures to you at the end of the day that there's been adherence to the overarching maintenance program, if you will, and gives the organization the confidence that the aircraft are free from risk. It gives the confidence back to the organization in the technician's ability to adhere to the maintenance program. and ultimately ensures the accountability of the personnel that are performing the maintenance, as there are numerous examples available online where aircraft have not been maintained properly and as such maybe falsified records, and the follow-on justice that was held to that person after the fact because of their failures in their overarching airworthiness responsibilities. But all that being said, it all links back to the 4A's of aircraft maintenance that I've previously discussed. By maintaining accurate records, I can ensure you that that aircraft has been maintained in accordance with approved standards, has been done so in accordance with approved maintenance programs, carried out by an authorized individual, and ultimately, shall I say, we'll just assume that it's being carried out within an accredited organization. That and those 4A's ensures that the certificate of airworthiness against that airframe is still valid and that aircraft is free from risk and safe for flight. I believe it's important that before we move forward, we talk about the consequences of not adhering to the maintenance program, but more specifically, not recording maintenance in accordance with those requirements as defined by ICAO or the FAA or the Canadian regulations here in Canada. Firstly, there's an increase in cost. What I'm talking about here is, think of a scenario where an aircraft is on ground because the maintenance organization found out after the fact that a serial number was not recorded properly. That aircraft sits on the ground at an estimated cost of $150,000 an hour, while someone is going out to verify serial numbers, as an example. There's a duplication of work that's carried out because now I have to render that aircraft unserviceable, undo the work that was previously done, redo a certain level of work, if you will, to confirm the overall adherence to the overarching maintenance program. By not capturing those records, there's an increase in the overarching airworthiness risk against that aircraft. By not documenting that that work was done properly, to that, what I mean is you don't know what you don't know. Anecdotally, the aircraft record set is what's confirming to you that that aircraft is being maintained appropriately. By not having an accurate record, questions the overarching serviceability of that airframe. You could be in a scenario where you're reinstalling a component that already has a life that's expired on it, and thus you're overflying that component's life. Potentially you're overflying a preventative maintenance inspection. So by not keeping those accurate records up to date, you invalidate the certificate of airworthiness, but that's where you start to introduce this level of risk. To quickly conclude, I've said this a couple of times, but maintenance recording and its importance ultimately cannot be overstressed. It's what's giving you, as the CEO or the maintenance manager, that confidence in your organization's ability to adhere to the maintenance program and ensures that your aircraft are being maintained with a valid certificate of airworthiness, free from any risks, if you will. And as I've already alluded to earlier, there's consequences resulting in the failure to do just that. The invalidation of the certificate of airworthiness and the increased level of risk is not something that any organization wants to unknowingly accept at the end of the day. We want to ensure that any risks against our aircraft are being identified and accepted at the appropriate authority. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. I've listed my references here for my presentation for you to research as you desired. And by all means, feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions, comments, concerns, or queries. Looking forward to hearing you. And I hope that wherever you are, that you're having a great day and enjoy the rest of your upcoming weekend. Cheers.